Thank you for joining us. Have you ever wanted to fly into space and visit the space station, or join a colony on the moon or Mars? Well, our panel today includes Congressman Bill Posey, Mr. Frank DiBello of Space Florida, and Dr. Al Koller and Steve Kane of SpaceTEC, who will share their views on our commercial space industry's latest activities and what we can expect in the future following these messages.
We have liftoff.
I'm privileged to introduce Dr. Al Koller, Congressman Bill Posey, Mr. Frank DiBello, and Steve Kane. Gentlemen, it's a pleasure to have you with us today.
Good to be here.
Dr. Koller, I'd like to ask you to open the conversation.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Richard. When NASA's Space Shuttle program wrapped up 2 years ago, many people asked, does the United States have a future in space? And the answer is, of course we do. And the goal of this video is to share the development that's taking place, especially in the commercial space industry, and to show how our space programs are growing across the country and especially here in Florida. Some still think that NASA is closing at the Kennedy Space Center and can no longer support space launches. And that also is simply not true. Today there are 18 launch sites across the country, and there are at least a dozen more in development in 10 states. And the programs that they are working on are pretty exciting and very, very different from what has happened in the past. And I'd like to outline just a few of those. Probably you've already heard of SpaceX with their Falcon rocket and their Dragon space capsule to do resupply missions to the space station. What you may not have heard of is Grasshopper, which is their vertical takeoff and vertical landing vehicle, which has now been successfully tested a couple of times, and they're coming on very strong. There's another company called Bigelow Aerospace, derivative out of the hotel industry, that has 2 payloads that are flying with inflatables that actually will be the forerunners for hotels in space. They fly collapsed as you would take a tent on a backpack, and when they get to space, they inflate and become habitats for humans. A third is Blue Origin, which is vertical liftoff and landing again, another vertical, the New Shepard rockets. Orbital Sciences has the Antares rocket and the Cygnus spacecraft for space station resupply. Virgin Galactic, I'm sure you've heard of, that's Spaceship Two. They'll be flying tourists to space probably in the coming year. And last but not least on my list is X-Corps with their Lynx rocket for reusable flights to suborbital or near-Earth orbit. And those are just 6 of perhaps 30 programs that are currently active in this country. Closer to home in Florida, we have 4 major programs. The Boeing Company CST-100. That capsule is being manufactured here in Florida. The Sierra Nevada has the Dream Chaser, which some of us call the mini shuttle, which will launch on a vertical rocket and fly back and land at the Kennedy Space Center shuttle landing facility, just like an airplane. Lockheed Martin has the Orion multipurpose crew vehicle. That will do, again, resupply and eventually deep space missions to the moon and Mars and perhaps beyond. And finally, again, SpaceX, they will take that Dragon capsule and man that and fly manned missions to the International Space Station. Those are all active right here in Florida at the Kennedy Space Center. I could go on, but you get the message. We're doing very well. There's a lot going on, and you need to hear about that, and that's what this program is all about.
All very exciting, Dr. Koller. Mr. DiBello, what's happening right now in Florida?
Well, I would point to three things. First, as Al mentioned, the commercialization of space activity is most significant. New commercial companies, a myriad of them, are bringing technology to the marketplace in the form of new launch vehicles and spacecraft, and are looking to Florida as a place for both manufacture and operations. Florida is leading the way in many respects in the commercialization of space activity. We are working aggressively with every major launch company and satellite or space manufacturing company to bring their activities here to Florida, as I mentioned, to both manufacture and launch. But concurrently, we're also working with NASA and the Air Force to take infrastructure that taxpayers have paid for, but which still has a very useful life, but there may no longer be a mission need, either in the Air Force or NASA, especially after the shuttle is retired. And the state is taking that infrastructure and revitalizing it to make it ready to support these commercial companies. So in a major way, Florida is leading the way to attracting much of this commercial space activity here. On the DoD, or defense marketplace front, there's also a lot happening. This year at the Cape, we can expect some 15 to 16 launches to occur, and that rate of launch, that battle cadence, is likely to occur each year for the next decade or more. This is significant because, as Al mentioned, many people do think that the program ended in Florida with the shuttle retirement, but on the day of the last shuttle flight, there were 6 vehicles on pads at the Cape being prepared for launch. Something else that's significant in the Air Force right now is the Eastern Test Range, which has been working aggressively with us over the past 5 years or longer, thanks to Congressman Posey's efforts in the past, to take the range and to streamline operations and processes and to drive down costs and the bureaucratic approaches to doing business that were relevant in the past but won't serve commercial markets. This will be an area of significant activity in Florida going well into the future. Third, in the nation's civil space program. As Al mentioned, we are well positioned to participate in whatever mission NASA does take on because they are preparing to manufacture and get ready their Orion spacecraft, and their launch vehicle is in design. There will be much less launch activity in the next decade, and when it does start, it'll be at a low level of activity, so we've been able to replace that with a lot of other work. But we are partnering with NASA to take, as I mentioned, that excess infrastructure and really to convert that infrastructure for support of the emerging next generation marketplace. Florida will remain a leader in space.
Thank you, Mr. DiBello. Congressman Posey, with so much activity taking place, with competition growing for space-related work, what are the most important challenges in the near term?
The biggest impediment to our progress in space, the government's progress and the commercial industry's progress, is uncertainty. And that uncertainty comes in a form of goal setting and funding. We have tried to address that recently in Congress with legislation that would create a board of directors, more or less, to appoint a NASA administrator and set goals. And instead of having that done by a bunch of politicians, you would have people involved in space and eminent scientists to do that. You know, we've spent billions of dollars on over 24 missions to nowhere in the last 2 decades. That's over 24 missions that were started and stopped before they were completed. That's not only been a lot of money wasted and a lot of resources wasted, but it's literally put our programs further behind. And we hope to overcome that and provide more certainty and more vision with this new legislation.
Congressman Posey, we hear people talking about NASA or Kennedy Space Center, about it closing, which actually is absolutely not true. The talk often turns to why we continue to work in space and why we support human spaceflight at all. You've been very active in this debate for a long time. What's your perspective?
Well, for the same reasons we tell other members of Congress every day as we try and sell space, everybody benefits from space every day, in every way, almost every hour. People don't stop to think about the weather report that they get based on satellite link communications. If they use a credit card, if they withdraw cash from a bank, if they use a cell phone or a laptop, Nike had batteries, Velcro, 6,000 products that come from space that people enjoy every single day without any second thought about it at all. We talk about the national defense. Space is America and the free world's Golan Heights. We talk about survival of the species. People thought we were silly talking about asteroid strikes 2 years ago. Recently we had an implosion of a very small asteroid over an uninhabited area of Russia that injured 1,200 people. And now people realize, yeah, that's a reality. We need to know more about space. We need to be more active in space. And those are just some of the many reasons that people should need to be more aware, and it's our job as best we can to help them become more aware.
Speaking of exploration, Congressman Posey, there's an argument as to whether man should go to Mars or the moon. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I agree with the first man to walk on the moon and most other eminent scientists that we've had up here before the Space Science and Technology Committee in Washington, D.C., and that is it's absolutely necessary that we return to the moon. It's the logical stepping stone on our ultimate travels to Mars. There's a lot of reasons for doing that. It's a good staging area. It's a good practice area. There's a lot about the moon we still need to learn about. We know also that the Chinese and the Russians plan to colonize the moon, not necessarily to study space rock like we did. And so we need to have a presence there for our future national security as well.
Congressman, I'd like to add to that point because, as you know, just because we went to the moon in the past doesn't mean it's trivial to go back. You've pointed out many times that when we were there, we could barely keep our astronauts alive for very long periods of time. They were not able to roam very far from their spacecraft. Every time they opened their spacecraft, they did lose oxygen. There were lots of characteristics about our first trips to the moon that did not give us the technology base that we need to explore beyond. So I don't think it's a question of moon or Mars. I think it's a question of pursuing the moon so that we develop the technologies, the rovers, the habitats, and the exploitation technologies to truly enable us to go to places beyond the moon. But the moon is a great staging platform, as you called out.
Yeah, certainly. And, we discover, then we explore, then we settle, we habitate, and then move onward. So it's part of the natural process of mankind to do exactly that. And those who say we only need to look at Mars, I think, are a little out of step.
With competition growing for space-related work, what are Florida's greatest challenges in the near term?
Well, I think that Florida has a unique opportunity because there's never been a better time for the growth of aerospace in this state. We have the right business climate, the right tax structure, the right workforce, and we are rapidly positioned to provide the right infrastructure to allow a company, no matter where they are in the U.S. and in fact globally, to come to Florida and to set their next generation manufacturing and operations facilities here. We want to continue to create the kind of environment that they can thrive in. So I would mention two problems that I think face us as we try to take and work with government to take a lot of that infrastructure and make it viable. First is timing. The commercial marketplace depends on the ability to move rapidly, to provide an environment that is cost-effective and efficient and very responsive to commercial needs. This requires an ability to bring capabilities to bear rapidly, which is not always easy when you're partnered with government to try to take that infrastructure and commercialize it. Secondly, there is a necessary culture change that is going to be necessary because the ways of doing business that were right in the past are going to have to be streamlined and change for the future. In the past, NASA was asked to get man to the moon, and the nation organized and funded an agency, and it organized specifically to achieve that mission. Since then, the agency has not been able to properly organize to reach out and achieve the successive missions that are in the past. All too often, the program has become much more of a project, a child of the Congress, to ensure that jobs are retained in those states, and that's not always optimum for meeting the nation's needs as we move to more and more of a commercial marketplace. So I think that that culture change is an important part of the obstacles that we face and the issues and challenges that we have to handle.
And to that point, it's great to see Kennedy Space Center Director Bob Cabano redirecting the efforts of NASA in that regard. And it's good to see the Air Force looking at FAA taking a more active part in its management of space at the Cape. You know, heretofore, they've had to deal with Washington bureaucrats that thought space travel needed to be as safe as an executive getting on a jet to go to Los Angeles, or a family from the Midwest flying to Disney World. And that's not going to move the space program forward, but they're looking at these paradigm changes now to help that become a reality.
Sir, people tend to think we have just one space program, NASA, but we now know we have many, actually. What changes do you see as commercial space companies become more active, and how will Florida be involved?
You know, we talk about commercial space, and the concept of commercial space is nothing new. The Apollo program was all commercial. I've known that actual mechanics and electrical technicians employed by NASA are few and far in between. This was done by a legion of commercial contractors who put together the first, second, third stage of the lunar landing module. And so the concept is new, it's just that the federal government was the ultimate customer. In a lot of the new commercial space, the federal government is still the customer, but they're going beyond that, as Frank touched upon and as Al touched upon, and they're going to the general public as a customer. So that's the big paradigm change. But we've always had commercial activity there. You know, we're entering a new era of space entrepreneurship, and the FAA and NASA are updating their regulations to make that accommodation.
I couldn't agree more. I think that the difference in the space program in the last 50 years and the program that will exist worldwide over the next 50 years is the fact that the marketplace will have changed. And as space is pervasive in our everyday lives, it is commercial companies and commercial customers that will become the dominant part of the market. In fact, they already are. Of a $300 billion global space marketplace, better than 75% of the revenues in that marketplace today come from commercial sources, and that trend is just going to continue. But it is a myriad of new companies that are taking the capabilities that we have in space and figuring out how to utilize some of the attributes of space to make money and to provide products and services that better our life here on Earth.
Mr. Kane, what are your thoughts on this?
What we're seeing now is kind of a blend, if you will. The suborbital flight arena has opened up a whole new realm of possibilities. And this realm, what it takes to take a vehicle to orbit, takes a spacecraft technician. And this is where the launch sites have developed that talent over the years. The other side of that, to get that vehicle where it can actually achieve orbit, takes a vehicle very similar to the aircraft of today. A lot of our partner colleges and Eastern Florida State College is now in the process of developing an AMP program to train aircraft technicians, and we're going to see a blend of these individuals in the future. Not only the individual that can maintain an aircraft, but an individual that understands rocket motors and life support systems and all these other specialized features that are required for vehicles that actually go to orbit. And that's what the challenge will be, is creating the programs that have that capability of blending those two talents into that future technician.
A lot of young people would like to be explorers.
Yes.
If they had a choice of occupations, if you said, we're hiring explorers, you'd probably have a pretty long line. If you said, we're hiring something else that's generic and worn out and looks boring, the line's going to be short. But I think the explorer line would be long, and we just need to recruit more explorers.
Would anyone else like to add to this?
In response to this innovation, need that we have as a nation and as a world. I get asked that question a lot about why our youth are not as interested in STEM careers. And I suggest that they are interested in science, they are interested in math. They are simply seeking careers that are relevant and have a contribution back to society. They want to do something meaningful. So we need to show them they want a career that's authentic, and we need to show them the relevance of what they pursue to our everyday lives. That's why I believe that they've lost some of that view of the aerospace industry and even of our space program, but they haven't as far as crime scene investigators go, or other programs that are popular that show them the value of science in everyday life. I think if we can go back and do that again with space, and there's no reason why we don't have more than enough material to work with, we'll attract kids back into the science world.
Well, I think you're absolutely right. I would go back to Congressman Posey's comments earlier about and yours as well, about the need for a plan and a set of goals that can show a continuity that builds not a job, but a career. Those are the crime scene people. That's a career, essentially, and kids pretty early in life can sort out which ones are going to make sense and which ones aren't. And you're right about the relevance piece. I think the R word is one of the most important pieces of what we're missing in the curriculum today. And go back to Steve's comments about technicians. If you look at the curriculum for technicians, most of the textbooks in our systems today are written for engineers, not for technicians. And most of those industrial arts classes that we had in high school a long time ago have gone away. Some of that needs to come back. And that's why I think the manufacturing sector is so important. We didn't talk a lot about that today, but it's embedded in what we're doing, and for the first time at the Kennedy Space Center, manufacturing spacecraft here, as well as assembling and launching from here, which has been our forte for a long time. That will make new jobs that are relevant and that we can teach to.
And I think that's kind of been what's lacking, is just the ability to have people understand. It just hasn't been, NASA tech briefs are read by engineers, and that was NASA's primary vehicle to move that technology out of NASA to let everybody know. But research organizations and engineers read those, but that doesn't necessarily communicate to the general population. So a lot of people don't know. They think those things were just technological leaps that occurred.
But there are a myriad of examples that are out there, and if we do open up the architecture so that commercial companies can figure it out, they'll figure out how to use a technology or exploit an attribute of space to make money. And if you take a look at GPS as a good example, there's both the position signal and the timing signal. And there are thousands of companies that have figured out how to use the position signal to provide information at the retail level that is very, very useful as you're driving around, or farmers looking at their field, to correlate that with weather information or map information. So these information products and services are spawned by a space capability that was enabled.
Well, this is all very fascinating. Dr. Koller, please conclude with a final thought here.
Well, there's a ton of really new and exciting activity that looks very different from what the space program of 30 years ago, 40 years ago. It's been 44 years now, I think, since we last set foot on the moon, or pretty close to that. We're going to go back. When we go back is in question. How we go back is in question. But whether we go back, in my opinion, is not in question. We all agree that forcing technology forward is absolutely essential to the future of our lives here on Earth. And space exploration is the magical key that turns on an awful lot of interest and support. And I hope that the people who watch this program take the opportunity to find their place in our space program, because it took a nation to get us to the moon. It's going to take a nation to get us back to the moon.
You're correct, Dr. Koller. Remember Neil deGrasse Tyson's famous quote that investing in space is the only thing our Congress truly does to benefit the next generation.
Gentlemen, this has been most interesting. I want to thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you.